prayers continue to be with Teresa and her son. Thank you, NAACP Dekalb County Chapter, for inviting me to be here. I saw my colleague. Did he step out, Larry Johnson? Okay, Larry and I go way back, and I just want to acknowledge him because we started in this business right around the same time. And I think Larry's first campaign, he fell short in that campaign, but that was my first campaign too for office. And you know, some people run and it doesn't work out the way it's supposed to. The first time they get discouraged and they give up, or they move on to something else, but Larry didn't get discouraged. I just want y'all to know this, I guess he's not coming back, so I'm not saying this for Larry's benefit, but I want you all to, I like to acknowledge people for what they give back. And Larry continued to stay engaged. He ran against Hank Johnson that go round. Hank won that race for the county commission. Larry continued by being involved with Hank as he served during his first term as a commissioner, and then a seat opened up after redistricting, and then Larry was able to run for that seat, and he won. And he's, I think by now, he's the longest serving member on the DeKalb County Board of Commissioners. So I just want to thank him for being here and acknowledge his service as well, and the service of so many others. Judge, I see you in the back. Chris Morris, I see you here. There may be others that I'm missing. My memory's not as good always as it used to be. But I wanted to just spend some very quick moments to give you a little background. Let me back up and talk about what I'm doing now. My name is Burl Ellis. Because I was DeKalb County CEO and a commissioner before that, I know many of you, your faces, and I want to thank you for your service. Thank you for the work of the NAACP. I'm now with the ACLU of Georgia, the ACLU of the American Civil Liberties Union. And probably most of you are familiar, but I don't want to take it for granted that you are familiar. The ACLU has been around for almost 100 years. It's a civil rights organization that has been fighting, defending the Constitution and fighting for justice. And that's what we do in the courts and in the streets. And we particularly realized that we needed to expand our efforts beyond the courtroom into the halls of advocacy, the state legislators and legislatures, and in city halls, in government, and in campaigning. And so I was hired by the ACLU's affiliate here in Georgia as their first ever political director late last year. And so in that role, we are increasing our advocacy efforts and working with the NAACP and other organizations that are in the trenches and at the forefront of doing this work. And so we want to be a partner to your efforts. Everything that I'm going to talk about today is going to be consistent with what I heard when I came back into the meeting just a few minutes ago. We have maybe the most important, certainly the most important election of our lifetime facing us. It's not a presidential election year, but it precedes a presidential election year. It sets the foundation for what's going to happen in 2020. And elections do matter. I think we all get that, and we all understand that we got to get out and vote in this election and take some people to the polls with us. Make sure everybody's registered, because there has been purging going on. So even if you think you've been registered and have been voting for the last several election cycles, check your election status. I want to encourage you to do that. Encourage other people to do that. Encourage people who are not registered to get registered and to vote early starting October the 15th. I got an email today from one of the candidates that says today is 30 days out. Today is September the 15th. Happens to be my 17th wedding anniversary. And, but I'm here working, and then I'm gonna be celebrating. Okay? But this is important work. I want to talk to you a little bit today about mass incarceration. I want to talk about what mass incarceration is. I want to talk a little bit, I'm gonna go through a quick run through about what it is, why we should care about mass incarceration, particularly as an issue in this 2018 election, why it matters, and criminal justice reform, how we go about ending mass incarceration and what you can do about it. And then I'll wrap up by quickly maybe sharing a little bit about my own personal experience with the criminal justice system and how that experience really informs and highlights how mass incarceration is driven and perpetrated throughout society. And so I want to first offer sort of a framework for what mass incarceration is. We launched a campaign for smart justice. This is our website up. You'll see it says Smart Justice Georgia. I'll talk a little bit about that. Ending mass incarceration and racial injustice. Because mass incarceration is racial injustice. It is a systemic social control. It is about the way that people are swept into the criminal justice system. It's about the way that those people are then labeled as criminals and felons. It's about how they're then locked up for extensively long periods of time, longer than what many other countries do when they lock people up. It's about how they then are sent to re-enter society with this stigmatization of still being a criminal and a felon and labeled in a permanent second-class category of citizenship. And then along with that stigma, legally they are denied basic civil and human rights. Fundamentally, the right to vote, but also the right to housing and opportunities to get jobs and so forth and so on. And that's why we say it's systemic. It is disproportionately employed against African Americans in this country. And that's why we say it is racial. It is racial injustice and systemic control. And I want to lay that as a foundation. And why do we care about it? Because the United States of America, land of the free, is the world's leader in mass incarceration. We have a mass incarceration crisis in the United States of America. We incarcerate more people than any other country, even the countries we like to demonize, Russia, China, North Korea. We incarcerate more people than any other nation in the world. The United States of America represents about 5% of the world population, and yet we lock up in cages about 25% of the world's prisoners. Those are alarming statistics, and the crisis is particularly acute here in Georgia. Georgia is an outlier. We incarcerate, we're number 4 in incarceration, but in terms of the rate of people under correctional control, that means people in jails, in prisons, on probation, or parole, because you're not free. You're not free when you're on probation. Don't raise your hands, but anybody here who's been on probation or parole, anybody here who's had a loved one or a friend or a neighbor on probation and parole knows that your rights and your freedoms are still denied you while you're on probation and parole. You know, forget about the reports into your parole officer, the urine tests you have to take on a regular basis to prove that you're not a drug addict, even if you're somebody like me who's never even used recreational drugs. If I'm using a drug, a doctor has prescribed it to me, okay? But you know, your rights, your freedoms are denied you, and we have the highest rate in Georgia of people under correctional control. African Americans are disproportionately impacted by the criminal justice system. The number of people in Georgia, let me add this, under felony probation is 4 times the national average here in Georgia. We have more people on felony probation. So what happens in Georgia is, you know, maybe you get out of prison, but then you're on these, you know, long periods of probation. I think 8 years is the average. 10 years is not unusual. And during that period of time, you continue to not be able to vote. You continue to not be able to serve on a jury. You continue to be subject to what would otherwise be an unlawful search and seizure. And a technical violation could cause you to land right back in the prison cell. It's like walking on eggshells while you're under probation. So we lead the United States in terms of number of people, 4 times the national average. African Americans, which make up about 1/3 of the state population in Georgia, constitute 2/3 of our prison population. That's disproportionate. If you're African American in Georgia, we're incarcerated at about 3 times the rate of whites. So people of color, and African Americans in particularly, are harshly impacted by the criminal justice system. Once incarcerated, there's a higher probability of returning to prison. 43% of the prison population in Georgia has been previously incarcerated, and 2/3 of all admissions are for parole or probation violations. So the things that wouldn't land you into prison ordinarily will land you back into prison if you commit, as I mentioned earlier, a technical parole violation. Increasing incarceration rates have not lowered crime. So over the last 40 years, while incarceration rates have gone up like this, so has crime. So we haven't seen a turnaround in crime. It hasn't kept us any safer by incarcerating more and more people for longer and longer periods of time. And so what we know about mass incarceration is it's costly and it's wasteful of taxpayer dollars. When someone's incarcerated, we pay for their housing, we pay for their food, we pay for their clothing, we pay for their medical care, we pay for their toiletries, and we have to supervise these people. Those are taxpayer dollars. We spend in Georgia somewhere north of $1 billion a year in corrections. And that is about a 200% increase since the 1980s. It diverts money that could be used for education, that could be used for healthcare, that could be used for transportation, that could be used for a number of quality of life needs. And anybody who's worked in government knows how difficult it is to get money to deliver the services that constituents need, want, and deserve. It also takes people who might otherwise be productive citizens, and it makes them incredibly unproductive. And I'm speaking not from a statistic, I'm speaking from a personal experience. I mean, one of the things that I realized from being locked up is that you have young men who might otherwise be out working, adding to the tax base, becoming a burden on the tax base, because they're just sitting around, lying around often, waiting for time to go by, not adding value to society as we use our taxpayer dollars to pay those costs related to that. So what we want to remember in summary is that mass incarceration is systemic social control that's disproportionately employed against people of color. It then permanently labels them as a means of legally denying them basic civil and human rights, which includes the right to vote. The right to vote is the right that undergirds all of our other constitutional rights, because when you can vote, you can change leadership in the United States of America. That's how we do things. And if you disproportionately deny a segment of the population based on race its right to vote, then you're disenfranchising that vote. It's racial injustice, and it betrays America's promise of liberty and justice for all. And that's why we should all care about mass incarceration. Now, it's a big problem. And so what we've done at the ACLU is we've launched a campaign for smart justice. And our campaign for smart justice, it's an ambitious campaign, but it's an achievable campaign. We've defined an end to mass incarceration at the point when we can reduce the jail and prison population throughout the United States by 50%. Similarly here in Georgia. And we've eliminated racial disparities in the criminal justice system. So we have two co-equal goals of reducing the jail and prison population as well as eliminating racial disparities. If all we do is reduce the jail and prison population and we still see the disproportionate number of people of color, and that is particularly been targeted against African Americans incarcerated, then we believe that mass incarceration still exists and continues to be a problem at a crisis level. And so we have to do both of those to solve this problem. And when we talk about Smart Justice Georgia, that is our statewide effort. And so this week we launched a website that will go through some of the things that you can do, and I want to show you that website real quickly. We know that there's some drivers of incarceration, such as cash bail. So about 60% of the people sitting in jail right now are innocent, presumed innocent. And we know that because the Constitution tells us that unless you've been convicted, there's a presumption of innocence. And they're sitting in jails right now simply because they can't afford to pay. And no one should be denied justice simply because they can't afford to pay. I want to make sure you understand this. Wealthy guy over here, accused of a crime, presumed innocent, gets to pay some money and then gets to walk out and enjoy his freedom. You know, guy in less fortunate circumstances under here doesn't have access to money, is still presumed innocent because he or she has not been convicted of a crime, but has to sit in jail while they wait to go to trial or wait for their case to be resolved. Because why? They just simply don't have access to money. And that's what we call our cash bail system. And so no one should be denied freedom. Cash bail is a driver of mass incarceration. Police reform or abusive policing targets often people of color. And we know that as people enter the system, that drives up the incarceration rate. We're looking at marijuana and the impact that drugs like marijuana have on running up. You know, marijuana criminalization has caused a number of people to be drawn into the criminal justice system. And interestingly, while whites and blacks tend to use marijuana at about the same rate, whites don't get arrested at nearly the same rate. And nationwide, African Americans get arrested at almost 4 times the rate as whites do for marijuana use and possession. We're looking at prosecutorial reform. I've got an interesting story to tell about prosecutorial abuse and how that can, instead of pursuing justice, when prosecutors abuse their power, they pursue convictions, irrespective of the facts, and how that targets African Americans and drives up the incarceration rate. We're looking at probation and parole, as well as in extensive sentencing, and I've talked about that, and how that causes people to sit around in cages for much longer periods of time than other countries do and than need be, and that drives up that rate. So I want to run through this very quickly. If I can find what happened here. It says no signal? Okay, here we go. So if you go to smartjusticegeorgia.org, you will find the ACLU's Smart Justice Georgia website, and it's got some interesting information. If you go to voter information, for example, you can look at the 2018 governor's race, and I want to see if I can get this to pull up the right way. Because it should be, give you a side-by-side comparison. And let's try again. I'm trying to figure out how I did it. Be patient with me if you would. I apologize.
Do you need a signal in order to do what you're trying to get to?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, here you go.
Yeah.
All right, so I want you to see side, and I realize you can't read that, but what you can do is go into these categories, and you have Abrams on the left and Kemp on the right, and we have them categorized, and I'm just going to read. So this is reforming the criminal justice system, and what we did is we took the candidate statements, and we wanted to highlight for you, the voters, what candidates are saying about issues of criminal justice reform. For example, Stacey Abrams says, do we want to be the Georgia that goes backwards backward to mass incarceration or goes forward and eliminates the stories of Georgia leaving behind its best and brightest. And we have the source, which is the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Brian Kemp says, Governor Deal's done criminal justice reform, we're going to do public safety reform. Georgia has become a distribution hub for the Mexican drug cartel. We've got a gang problem. And let me see if I can find. He goes on to say, and we have the source, to put more criminals behind bars and curb the growth of gang membership, Kemp will empower the Attorney General's office to prosecute gang cases with jurisdictions that span multiple counties. And Stacey Abrams says, I'm committed to working collaboratively with the courts, state agencies, law enforcement, community-based partners, and the legislature to continue and expand criminal justice reform. So we want to remind people, and because we're nonpartisan, that criminal justice reform started with Governor Nathan Deal, who's a Democrat. I want to go back. I know, I'm not everybody caught that, didn't they? No, I didn't say that on purpose. That was a slip of the tongue.
Okay.
But a Republican, thank you. Okay. I want to go and show you our legislative scorecard. So you can go in and you can look up, like we'll start with the state senate, and once again you can go in here and you can see, you can look up any state senator and see how they voted. And the way it works, and I know you can't see much back there, but you'll be able to see when you go home, but what you can see is the name of the senator. If they have a green check, there's a bill described above it, and the ACLU of Georgia has whether we support or oppose. If they agree with our position, everything from criminal justice reform to medical marijuana to voting hours to I can't read it all myself, but you'll be able to see keeping polling places open. We gave them a check if they agree with our position, and an X if they disagree, and then we gave them a score. If they have an E, that means they were excused from voting and it didn't count against them. But if they have an NV, that means they just simply didn't vote on a particular bill. So you can see how any legislator, House or Senate, voted. And for example, here's somebody who got a 14% score. Here's somebody who got a 100% score. Here's somebody who got a 0 here. So you can see how everybody voted. And I want to close because I think, how much time? All right, so I want to close by just showing you a quick video. There's a couple of videos on here. One by one of our spokespeople, Arian Davis, and some of you may know of Arian from Love and Hip Hop, but I'll see if I can pull up a real quick video. That you'll see on the entry here's what you can do. In order to get involved, please visit smartjusticegeorgia.org website. I'm not going to have time today to tell you about some of my own personal experiences, which I had hoped to do. But visit that website. Hopefully I'll have an opportunity to come back and we can talk more about that. I've handed out some forms for you today, and this is what I've got to do. I've given you either a card that says pledge to be an ACLU voter, or I've given you a piece of, you maybe received a piece of paper that talks about joining us. If you're so inclined, please fill that out. You can check off a number of different activities. We're running phone banks on Wednesday nights to encourage people to get out and vote and to vote early. We'll be doing canvassing. We'll be working the town halls, some of which you've heard, dates of which you've heard tonight. We want to make sure that these issues of criminal justice reform are being raised before the candidates, not just the gubernatorial candidates, but as you've seen from our video, we're focusing also on the lieutenant governor's race, the Secretary of State's race, the Attorney General's race, as well as some of the legislative races. We want to make sure that you're informed. We want to make sure that you have opportunities to, and know what to do so that you can be engaged. No one should have an excuse of, I wanted to do something, but I just didn't know what to do. If you go to our website, if you fill out this form today, I'll wait around. I do have to go pick up my daughter from down the street, but I'll stay around as and if you'll pass those forms up to me as I'm packing up all my equipment, and then we will follow up and contact you, and we promise you will be involved, because we'll make sure that if it's not us, it'll be the NAACP, or it'll be somebody contacting you saying this is what we need you to do, okay? Thank you all. Appreciate your time.